Thank you for everybody for coming to this exit seminar. I retired 2 years ago, but I decided to do it now because I've been still active. Now that my chair pushed me out of my office, it's time to do an exit seminar. So, it's interesting that you mentioned Chile because the military in Chile are right now in the streets because the neoliberal model that was exposed as the most successful one failed. And the government now has to negotiate with the people in Chile as they have done in Ecuador and so on. So this is coming, I don't know if in the United States, but in Latin America, definitely the people have already demonstrated that the change comes from down, not from above. So going to my talk, it's interesting that California agriculture is a compelling case of natural resource exploitation for capitalist development because really California landscapes and Mediterranean climate were manipulated and exploited to serve really modern agribusiness interests. One of the main actors in this transformation early on was a person called A.P. Giannini. You're probably familiar with Giannini Hall. He was an Italian. I don't know if he came from the mafia or not, the Calabria or anyway, but anyway, he founded the Bank of Italy, and then later on, he grew and created the Bank of America, and then it was basically by lending farmers money. You can see in 1930 he had loaned money to 12,000 farmers and covering about 1.7 million acres worth about $70 million at that time. And then he decided to donate some money to the University of California, and he donated $1.5 million in 1928. The economists can tell me how much is that today. And to create the Giannini Foundation, which the main focus at the beginning until the 1950s was actually rural credits. How do we get more credits to farmers, get them more in debt, land settlement, agricultural marketing, and international trade, such as, for example, how do we dry all these fruits and sell them to Asia? So agriculture in California has been never been the domain of small farmers. It has been just huge large land holdings since the time of the gold rush, and California can be described as a monoculture of diversity because you go out there and you see different plots that have different crops, but basically it's a vast array of crops in unrelenting swaths of sameness, huge landscape simplification across the state. Now, California booming economy was created because thanks to labor. So the first group were the Native Americans, obviously, and after that, Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, many other Asian countries, and Mexicans, obviously. And these farm workers have suffered, and today still suffer, the worst conditions of any labor sector. Their living conditions and their wages and so on, and their rights. And in California, we have about 500 to 800,000 farm workers, about 90% of them Mexican farmers that were displaced by free trade agreements because the price of the corn that they produced was cheaper. It was more expensive than the one that the U.S. dumped on their economy through the free trade, the NAFTA. And 75% of are undocumented. Therefore, they're very vulnerable right now to the policies of this government. They have no rights. And 1/3 are women. And about 400,000 are children in the United States. Now, there's a lot of talk about environmental racism, but one of the biggest recipients of this are the farm workers. Actually, the U.S. EPA estimates that 300,000 farm workers are poisoned by pesticides every year. Some of these lead to several chronic problems. And Latino children in California are 91% more likely than white students to attend schools near heavy pesticide use. Now, at some point in the 1950s, UC Davis started creating the tomato harvester because there were rumors that all the labor was going to be in danger because the Bracero program was going to be finished, and therefore they were using about 80% of the labor force, cheap labor force. And in the first 5 years after this machinery was released into the fields, 4,428 of 5,000 tomato growers went out of business, and about 32,000 farm workers lost their jobs. And in order to afford the machinery, you had to have 140 acres as a minimum. That was the economics of scale, and that obviously led to the demise of small farmers and obviously They were worried at the beginning that they were going to lose the farm workers, but when the machinery came, the big ones didn't care because they could use the machinery to harvest the tomatoes. So we built an empire with the help of the University of California. Contributes today $47,000 or more billion dollars. Produces about 1/3 of the nation's vegetables and about 2/3 of the nation's fruits and nuts. And at what environmental and social cost? That's the important question. For example, we grow 90% of the strawberries, but the strawberries, are grown in these monocultures using methyl bromide, which was forbidden because it destroys the ozone layer, but also has all kinds of health implications. But they are still being used, despite the fact that the Montreal Protocol says that it has to be stopped. So let's go back a little bit to the history here that deals more with Berkeley. From 1850 to 1870, there were tremendous amounts of crops being grown in California, fruit crops, some of them citrus, for example. But very soon, the farmers started seeing their crops destroyed by pests, especially exotic pests. So, UC Berkeley, which had been created in 1868 as a land-grant university, there were some entomologists working here, such as Harry Scott Smith, which led the UC pest control research efforts for 38 years. And from 1923, biological control at the citrus experiment station down in Riverside started. In 1944, there was the creation of the Division of Biological Control, at the beginning called the Division of Beneficial Insects Investigations. And in 1963, it was created as the Division of Biocontrol, which Professor Nick Mills and I had the honor to serve. So here there are some very important people, Harry Scott Smith on the left and Professor Robert van den Bosch. And at that time, as I said, citrus was being destroyed by a pest called the Cotonou scale. And researchers went to Australia. I don't know how they figured out that it was exotic, that was from Australia. There was no internet at that time. They went by ship, and they brought the colonies. Here you can see how they brought them to California at that time. And within 1 year, the Cotonou scale ceased to be a substantial pest, and the total cost of the operation to save the citrus industry at that time was $5,000. Robert van den Bosch and many of the other colleagues were very good entomologists, kind of naive politically, but suddenly they saw that what they were doing was attempting against the interest of the big chemical companies. He was very much involved in biological control. He did a lot of interesting work. One of them was, for example, using alfalfa strips within cotton fields to control pests, because the alfalfa field serves as a trap crop of the Lygus bag, but also a source of beneficial insects to control some of the Lepidopterus pests. And then Van den Bosch in 1977 said, this is before his book, he said, "I'm perfectly aware that there has been efforts on the part of a number of chemical control-oriented groups to have my university administration put a stop to my integrated pest management efforts." He was very aware of that. And the division's dilemma at that time, and there's a very interesting paper called The Killing Fields of Berkeley, if you want to read it, says that indeed the history of the division suggests that public interest research may frequently be viewed as a threat to the private accumulation of wealth. Because if you start stopping, like Berkeley did with his research on biocontrol, saving California $2 billion in 4 decades of pesticides without accounting of the benefits, health and environmental, that's a huge threat to the industry that was funding the university, obviously. So in 1995, I won't tell some names, the administration, our dean at that time, and in spite of the contribution to the social welfare, the Division of Biocontrol was dismantled. That was down in the Gill Trend. Interestingly enough, if you look at what happened after that, today in California, pesticide use has gone up. 209 million pounds are applied annually of different pesticides. Pesticides classified as human carcinogens and likely human were applied to nearly 9.2 million acres statewide. That was only in 2016. And actually, with the intensification of agricultural pesticide use going up, it's not going down. But the division was working against that trend and in a economically and environmentally viable way. So, at that time, when the division was dismantled, in 1980s, the Berkeley began to encourage university industry partnerships because they said that the state was not supporting us, and therefore they started prioritizing innovations that were not really of the interest of the public domain. This was the beginning of the restructuring of the College of Natural Resources, encouraging projects funded by biotechnology multinational big business, for example, Novartis, BP, transforming, in my opinion, UCB's public agricultural research mission and infrastructure forever. Now, Berkeley research became dominated by the biotechnology industry, with research products being more about enhancing the corporate profits than solving environmental problems linked to industrial farming or to benefit small farmers. And this was all guided by kind of a Malthusian perspective that still remains, in which the predominance and obsession with technological solutions against the background of persisting hunger reflect the crisis in understanding about the root causes of world hunger and poverty. And so some of the projects, although they were not developed here, but by other scientists on biotechnology, was, for example, the golden rice. And there are scientists here that defend this type of technology. The golden rice was because in Asia there's people that have problems of vitamin A deficiency, so therefore what a better solution that provide a rice that has high level of beta-carotene. But remember that beta-carotene is just the precursor of vitamin A. So in order for you to have vitamin A in your body, there's a conversion in your liver, and for that you have to have fat and protein, and poor people usually that eat only rice don't have that. But anyway, the idea went ahead, and what they started was promoting the golden rice promoting, this is really golden rice as you can see there, at the expense of traditional systems. These traditional systems that existed that still exist throughout Asia and Southeast Asia are systems that are very diversified, and they have not only rice, they have fruit trees, they have ducks, they have fish, they have rotations. When the rainy season is over, they come with other crops. And these systems, interestingly enough, also the farmers grow weeds, which we eliminated here because we consider them as plants out of place. But it turns out that throughout the third world, in Latin America, we call them quelites, the small farmers, which are all edible plants. They're all rich in protein and so on. So these farmers were harvesting these plants from the rice paddies because they serve as medicine, as food, as fodder, and so on. And interestingly enough, if you look at here, one of those leafy vegetables that were being harvested had about 444 grams per fresh weight of beta-carotene, when the golden rice has 37. So you have to eat like 2 kilos of this golden rice to get what you would get from one weed that was being eliminated by the herbicides of the Green Revolution. And in addition to that, because these systems are monoculture intensive, you're eliminating the fish, and these fish are the source of protein, but also they play key ecological roles in the rice systems. They control pests, they control weeds, they are very important in the recycling of nutrients, and so on and so on. So, in my opinion, the UCB Novartis deal did not produce any tangible benefit, like biocontrol, that we can show $2 billion in saving on pesticides, benefiting society. Actually, nothing useful for California society at large came out of this stuff. A building that is somewhere there. No one cent of the $25 million from the UCB Novartis deal was spent on examining the ecological impacts, and the social impacts. Although there was a lot of alerts from different scientists, respectful scientists within this campus too, that were saying, hey, wait a minute, let's examine this technology. There's no 1 cent that went into looking at the social consequences and the environmental consequences, although the University of California is obliged, since the tomato harvester, to look at the social consequences of technological innovation. That's what came out of the lawsuit that was started by the California Legal Rural Assistance at that time. So at the heart of these conflicts are the tensions that emerge from the convergence of university and corporate research agendas and the threat that poses to academic freedom. And we have some cases here in this campus of that. Scientists are being forced to adopt a more entrepreneurial mindset, and universities are inclined to solicit ever larger proportions of private investment. And actually, this is connected to how corporate control not only affects the kind of research, but the publishing of academic research. Neoliberal practices colonize the academic profession through the establishment and propagation of evaluation systems and quantifiable actions such as publishing and securing grant funding. This distorted perspective of academic professionals as entrepreneurs, because the more you publish, the more money you get more promoted. Has deep and ecological implications because precludes the deep and political reflections on the academic profession and its social purposes. What is our social purpose as scientists? It's not just to bring money and publish papers, in corporate type of controlled publication outlet, but it's to serve the public good, because we're still a land-grant university, in my opinion. Now, after that Novartis deal, there came another deal called the BP deal, British Petroleum, Beyond Petroleum. And this was done despite the fact that after the Novartis agreement, there was a mandatory review by a group of Michigan State University people that actually cautioned the university against entering into future agreements with the industry. But it's interesting that as we were moving in this direction, we were not solving the problems, the local problems, not even the problems of our students. If a university has importance, it should have an impact at least 20 kilometers in radius. But here we have within our campus students that are insecure, food insecure, and we have our backyard full of insecure people, food deserts, or how you want to call them, in Oakland, for example. Alameda County, with a population of 1.5 million, has about 250,000 people that are food insecure. And in the Oakland flatlands, actually, there's no supermarkets, and there's the highest concentration of liquor stores. So what is the impact that we're having at the local level? It's kind of not too big. Interestingly enough, back in some years ago, there was a graduate student, McClintock, in geography, who came up with a very interesting science showing that in Oakland, there's 1,200 acres of vacant and underutilized public land that could be potentially used for food production. And my question was, how is it that there's abandoned land, 1,200 acres, that's about 400 hectares, and we have food deserts, we have people that don't have access to fresh food. So my idea, which I proposed, but obviously was not entertained, why don't we bring some Cubans that produce about 18 kilos per square meter with ecological techniques, because when the crisis hit, that they perfected urban agriculture. They have more than 50,000 hectares in the island. So what I calculated was, okay, if we bring Cubans to train us, and our yields will not reach 20 kilos, will reach half of that, 10 kilos. So if 400 acres reaching 10 kilos per square meter, we could produce enough food if everybody ate 50 kilos of food, of fresh food, vegetables especially, and some eggs. We could be feeding 800,000 people in Oakland right now, if there was the political will, and there was an emphasis of the University of California on urban agriculture, because we are in the midst of a state that is being urbanized. 80% of the population lives in cities, and we're in the midst of an urban area, and we have some pieces of land that we could devote for the creation of a Center for Biological Control, which was brought up many times to the administration, and many times they deny it. We did experiments. I don't know if some of you took my class on urban agriculture or agroecology with the students, and we found that the systems are over-yielding. The LER value, 1.84, means that the system over-yields monocultures in 84%. For example, arugula-mizuna mixture produces 84% more produce than a monoculture of just mizuna by itself. So we need to restore the public mission of the land-grant university in order to prepare the new generations of scientists and practitioners with the necessary skills to tackle the challenges facing our food systems. And one of them is the promotion of local food systems, given climate change, failures in industrial agriculture, increased energy costs, demographic pressure, etc., etc. So for that, what we would need to do is intensify the research in our tracks, which we have two. One is the Gill tract, where the Division of Biocontrol was located, and the Oxford tract. But there's plans to develop both land tracts. One couldn't be developed because there was a huge protest. I don't know if you've seen the film. What's the name of the film? Occupy the Farm. Thank you. And it's interesting because these lands are attached to the land-grant mission. They were purchased in 1920 with funds partially provided by the state treasury for use in connection with the then existing UC Department of Agriculture. Remember that we were the first college of agriculture in the state. And since 1945 to today, many faculty have said that closing tracks would impair the agricultural activities, especially now with increasing student demand on classes related to food and agriculture. I have actually forwarded to the dean, to our actual dean, many documents about that were signed by presidents of the university and committees of the university that actually opposed the development of this land because it served the mission of the land-grant university. So, researchers on agroecology, the few that are left, I think it's Professor Tim Bowles, and on urban agriculture, none because the class is not being taught anymore, will have no land to conduct research at the university as the university develops both tracks. I don't think this is a concern to biotechnology people because their work on genetic engineering, genomics, and synthetic biology is done mostly in laboratories and greenhouses. And in my opinion, most of them are aimed at developing a set of false solutions to the climate and hunger crisis and as tools to make the dominant industrial agriculture a little bit more sustainable or more green. So what is happening is that we have challenges for the future. We need to increase production, but not double production as before the year 2030, as the FAO is saying. We're going to have less land, we're going to have problems of water, climate change, and what agroecologists are saying is that these challenges cannot be met with the existing industrial agricultural model and its biotechnological derivations, that we need a new paradigm. And by the way, today, FAO, the Committee on Food Security, which is a world committee where all the governments of all the world go, voted not unanimously with the US and Argentina, the usuals, and Australia opposed, but all the other countries voted that agroecology is the path of the future for FAO and the international community. So what we need, and what we're talking about, is systems that are going to be promoting vibrant local economies, social equity, that are going to be culturally appropriate, that we're going to produce food that is going to promote the health of the people, environmentally sustainable. We need an agriculture that's going to be decoupled from fossil fuel dependence, that have low environmental impact, that are resilient to climate change, that are multifunctional. Not only they produce food, but they also preserve cultures and social services and ecological services, and they're the foundation of local food systems. And for that, we need an agriculture that has high diversity, high productivity, high efficiency, and we get that through the integration of systems, of livestock and crop systems, and high recycling rates, and low dependence on external inputs. So agroecology started emerging as an approach to apply ecological concepts and principles to the design of these systems. We felt very early on the need to combat rural poverty and to conserve and regenerate the deteriorated resource base of small farms. And we saw agroecology as a new approach to resource management that lent itself to a more participatory approach and appropriate technology approach. And there has been many reports that have come out in the last years by different groups of scientists, IPES, for example, or IISTD, or FAO, and so on, saying that a growing number of reports suggest significant potential social and environmental gains from transitioning toward agroecological agriculture as a way to nourish current and future populations. And the evidence, you can see it in the reports. So what is agroecology? It's basically a science that promotes the dialogue of wisdoms, because we have our Western approach, and we have our codes and our taxonomies, but small farmers that have been farming for thousands of years have their own codes, and with that, their systems have to do the test of time. And from there, we derive principles. So, as Claudia was saying, my early preoccupation was to learn from these farmers, because they've been there in the Andes, in Mesoamerica, 5,000 years, generation after generation, and their systems are productive and they're resilient. How many farmers do we have? Small farmers, about 1.5 billion, and they conserve about 1.9 million varieties in their systems. The Green Revolution only has 7,000 varieties that they created. This is 1.9 billion varieties that are the genetic basis for the agriculture of the future. And not only that, they produce 50 to 75% of the food that we eat, controlling only 25 to 30% of the land, using 30% of the water and 20% of the fossil energy. Industrial agriculture, which occupies 80% of agricultural land, uses most of the water, pollutes the environment, only produces 30% of the food that we eat. So when you eat, please thank a small farmer and not Cargill or some other corporation. So these systems, as Claudia was saying, I was exposed to them very early on, and I came to California with the idea of, well, why don't we break the monocultures? Let's provide some resources for beneficial insects in our vegetable crops, in our vineyards, and many farmers are using these technologies today, these principles actually, they're not technology, and in a very successful way. So, but agroecology doesn't finish there. It's not just the technological option of changing one system and redesigning it to be more resilient and productive, but what we're talking about is the transformation of the corporate food system, which will require major shifts from societies embedded in the market economy to a greater reliance on alternative food networks. And there is a very important rural sociologist, Van der Ploeg from Netherlands, who talks about the food empires. The food empires are corporations that control the food system. They determine what the farmers are going to grow, how much they're going to grow, with what technology, and so on. And also they control the supermarkets that determine what the people are going to eat, how much they're going to pay for it, the quality of that food. So they have strangled the food system. And what he's talking about is the creation of a bypass that is controlled by small farmers that control territories, agroecological territories, with consumers that enter into what we call in Spanish, economía de la solidaridad, a solidarity economy relationship. There is exchange of money, but it's not ruled by the capitalist market economy. It's more ruled by solidarity economics. So it is important today to recognize that agroecology is the way. The CFS just declared it today at FAO. Scaling up the agroecology is going to take a lot of work. Some of it has to do with supporting farmer-to-farmer networks, funding research and education in the universities on agroecology, providing and enabling public policy environment, like, for example, countries like Brazil, Uruguay, many have a national policy of agroecology, taking specific actions for empowering women, who play an important role, and making strategic alliances with social movements. We cannot work isolated from social movements. I think the Chilean government today has learned that if you don't work with social movements, you're not going to get anywhere. And obviously, as part of those social movements are the consumers that need to understand that eating is both an ecological and political act. So I have some questions for students and faculty. For example, is agrarian capitalism sustainable over the decades ahead, both for workers, consumers, and the ecosystem, if it is kept strangled by crop monoculture and the application of deadly pesticides and fertilizers and genetic homogenization? As the soil becomes more depleted, the groundwater poison, chemical-resistant bugs more prevalent, and climate change accelerates, will nature become an obstacle to profit-making that even technical fixes won't overcome? I think these are important reflections about what kind of food system, what kind of agriculture we want for the future. And for that, I think that we, students, the public, which funds the university, and other, the governments, the local governments, have to make the agricultural experimentation accountable. For example, no more publicly supported research that is going to be a subsidy for agribusiness. No more agricultural research and extension to favor large farmers and be disadvantageous to family farmers, which are so important. No more stressing mechanization and pesticides while ignoring the concerns and well-being of the farm workers, which are the ones that are working out there hard enough to provide the food that we eat. No more research and extension establishment that ignores rural poverty and other rural social problems. We need, and especially the students that come here to get an education for the future, because the future is it already arrived, it's going to be very different from the future that we lived. You need to continue contesting private sector activities in our universities, particularly genetic engineering, globalization of agricultural technologies, and the false solutions to climate change. We have to go to the root causes and not just to the symptoms of climate change, like carbon markets and so on. So with that, I don't know, I think we have 10 minutes for some questions or some comments, which I welcome and I respect. Thank you very much.